Firstly, I just want to really thank the organizers of this exciting event. I've got a number of slides to show today, but I'm going to speak as much as I have the time, so don't get stressed by the number of slides that I have. The presentation is basically going to be focusing primarily on what we are doing as a Department of Science and Innovation in support of agriculture in all its various forms. Whether you're talking about the modernization, whether you talk about farmer development, etc. And the work that we're doing, as it has been the theme throughout this day, is actually what we are doing in partnership with a whole lot of people that are here and the agencies and the entities that are represented. So I'll give a very brief reflection on the white paper on science, technology, and innovation, which was adopted last year, and then the bioeconomy strategy, which is a bit older than the white paper, and then also share with you some of the current investments that we're having in agriculture, and then to indicate what is it that we're going to be doing next. But this order might actually be the other way around as time goes on, depending on how we're hitting on our time. Firstly, I think we all are aware that there are a number of challenges that we have to navigate as this country. Perhaps not only as a country, but as a continent, and then we also have a number of problems that we have to deal with that have become global challenges. Because as we have seen, the interconnectedness of the world means that problems that are happening very far away can actually easily, within 24 hours, become problems that we share and partake in. And we are currently sitting in the eye of the storm in terms of the outbreak of the coronavirus, which is impacting on everything happening, having started somewhere in China, but actually impacting on the economies globally. So here we obviously have to deal with the issues of unemployment, inequality, and poverty, which we need to find ways of addressing. And our sense is that innovation has got a critical role to play in all these facets of our challenges that we deal with. So we all know that there's been a number of policy documents. I think somebody had indicated earlier on that there's something that government is very good at doing, which is to develop policies, but that when it comes to implementation, we've got to find implementation partners like yourselves to actually help us do what needs to be done. So we are looking as this national system of innovation as to how can we actually better transfer technologies and knowledge to the poor and the informal community, but also understanding that the role of science goes beyond that, but it also is about how do we provide sustainable alternatives to service delivery solutions. And then, of course, enhancing capabilities of various institutions to leverage innovations for inclusive development and also support household food insecurity and sustainability of the agricultural sector. And when we talk about food security, it's not just a matter of having food on the table, but also the issue of nutrition. This is supposed to be the path in the innovation value chain, but those of you who are involved in innovation will know that nothing is straightforward. So this path is actually a very theoretical one, but in terms of the reality, things can go from 1 to 3 and then to 7. So what is it that we need to look at in terms of the white paper on science, technology, and innovation? There are a number of provisions that we're looking at. One of the core issues that we focus on, inclusivity, transformation, and partnerships. And partnerships, I think that must be underlined because there isn't anything that we can do if we try to go solo. And as the saying goes, they say if you want to walk fast, you better walk alone. But if you want to go far, then walk with others. So in 2013, we launched the bioeconomy strategy, which basically was looking at how South Africa, as one of the most biodiverse countries, can actually take advantage of its biodiversity to deal with the challenges, whether you're talking about food security, the economic growth, employment creation, etc. So how do we actually make sure that as a country we take advantage of the natural resources that we are endowed with? So the bioeconomy actually has 3 thematic chapters, and that's our focus area: health, agriculture, and industry and environment. and then IKS being the cross-cutting pillar, IKS standing for Indigenous Knowledge Systems. And I think this is really one of the areas where we think there are a lot of opportunities. We have had the previous speaker making reference here to what, for example, can be done in terms of various opportunities in the cannabis sector. So this is really our vision in terms of agricultural bioeconomy, looking at a vibrant and economically sustainable agricultural sector through bioinnovation technologies, ensuring that the products, the processes, and the services that we develop are actually taking us into making sure that we do not become a food insecure country. So this is really just a reflection on a number of challenges. I'm going to flip through this very quickly, and we'll make sure that those who may want to lay your hands on the presentation, you actually get it. I'm going to skip this slides as well. One of the challenges that we have in South Africa in many areas, or in all areas, is challenges of inadequate funding. Nothing is actually adequately funded. Whether you talk about cultural research, farming itself, everything is just not properly funded. We do find that in most instances, what we invest, whether it is in R&D, is much less than what everybody else in the world is investing. So there is always a need in terms of how do we make sure that we actually can continue to grow our investments in these areas. And I think we have tried, and there are some successes, but always there are some disappointments in the sense that you actually never ever get to be receiving what you all require. There's a lot of competition. There are people who are queuing in for housing, people who are queuing in for grants. There is hospitals that need to be upgraded, etc. And then, of course, we all are here because we've got one form of relationship with agriculture this morning or yesterday or whatever it was, if you are not fasting. So we actually also make sure that agriculture is also properly resourced. The issue of imports and exports, this is quite an area that I think people that are here want to make sure that as a country, when it comes to food, that we actually become net exporters and not net importers. And we've got that capability to do that, as long as we make sure that we take care of the basics. One of the previous speakers made mention of making sure that you actually do the right things so that you can actually get the kind of traction that you require. Now, these are some of the threats that we have to deal with when we talk about agriculture and food production. It's the fact that we now have to deal with climate change. Now, there are so many unknowns that this is throwing into the whole area of farming. I'm quite lucky in the sense that I'm also involved in the group on Earth observation, which is looking at establishing the global Earth observation system of systems. And one of the things that we're doing out of that as a project is to launch what we call the Digital Earth Africa. South African version of it, we call it the Digital Earth South Africa. And this is basically where you're looking at time series data about whether it is rainfall pattern, vegetation cover, but that is the kind of information that gives you a sense of how much things have changed over the years. So you can no longer just sit and say, summer is going to start at this time of the year and we're going to go out there and we're going to sow, we're going to plow, and we're going to harvest. But there are so much changes currently that are being brought about by climate change. That one, we don't get rainfall when we expect we're going to get it. And then two, when we get it, we don't actually get the amount of rain that we wanted. So you either get too little or too much. That creates havoc as opposed to actually doing what we would expect it to do. So these are threats that when we get into modern farming and modern agriculture, we have to consider. And of course, as I've mentioned, you either have severe droughts and floodings and all sorts of other challenges. And what those does is it's not only impacting on farming per se, but other aspects that impact farming. For example, the issues of energy generation, because of course, there is a lot of role that power and biomass, water and biomass play as well when it comes to issues of energy generation. So while there are so many challenges, there are also opportunities. And I do think that when we look at agriculture, one of the things is that, it's not an option. It has to be done. People are going to need to eat. And therefore, we actually need to make sure that we find ways of producing food. So these are really just the opportunities in terms of various crops. And of course, the havoc that climate change is creating also means that we also may have to rethink some of the crops that we cultivate to generate food. We are, as the Department of Science and Innovation, making some investments in agriculture. There are a number of programs that we are running. And I must say that what is exciting for us is that these projects are not just being run by the Department of Science and Innovation, but also a lot of partnerships that involves other entities in government, private entities, universities, and various colleges and science councils. So we have been looking at the investment of R&D generally. We know that it has stagnated in South Africa for the past 5 or so years. We're trying to get it to grow, but under the current economic situation, it's actually a very big challenge. So what are really the objectives that we're looking at? One is to say there are a number of indigenous crops that have been grown. Some of them have got very good traits in terms of tolerance, whether it is for drought, pesticides, etc. And we need to really look at how can we improve production of those through modern technologies. How do we also improve some of the mainstream crops in agriculture and also continue to make sure that we not only look at the presence of food, but also how the particular crops that we grow can actually give us food that is rich in nutrition. We've got our own strategic direction for the next 5 to 10 years, and this has actually been developed through a lot of consultation. Firstly, looking at crop plant improvement using modern technologies, whether it is molecular technologies and genetic engineering. Animal improvement, same approach. And then we also have, as I've indicated, the area of indigenous knowledge system. And we're looking at how we can support aquaculture and industrial biotechnology. But then there are also a whole lot of cross-cutting issues that we need to look at. We need to produce what we produce in a safe environment. Hence, there is a need to look at issues of biosafety. We need to have international partnerships. We also need to continue to communicate, because the advent of newer technologies also means that there is a lot of rumor and fear-mongering about technology. So we need to be able to communicate what technologies do and what they don't do, so that people can actually be able to separate and differentiate between news and fake news. So we have launched the agricultural platform, which is looking at a number of crops, and we're partnering with, in terms of funding, with the Winter Cereal Trust, Sasol Trust, the Maize Trust, Grain SA, IDC, TIA, Oil and Protein Seed Development Trust, but we also have a number of other key project partners. And what we find very exciting here is that this is the kind of partnership that is not only looking at how we can support the mainstream agricultural production, but these are actually partnerships that are also aimed at improving and taking along the emerging farmers. So we are quite excited about these programs, and there's a number of investments that we've made over the couple of years, and we're looking at continuing to increase the department's financial investment in this program. So one of the projects is around wheat breeding. We all know that our staple is sort of changing towards more the wheat-based products. And we really need to be very careful, because when you have a staple that for which you are actually a net importer, you are actually creating havoc in terms of what could actually happen. Sometimes it could be economic challenges, it could be the value of your currency, it can also be a whole lot of other political instabilities and climate issues that happen in the country from which you import that can create havoc. So we actually therefore need to look at how best can we make sure that we develop innovations and technologies that will enable us to grow what we use as stable in our own, within our own borders. This is a very good project that we've been working on for a number of years now around the eucalyptus genome project. We all know that growing these trees takes a number of years. And if you want to really breed, you don't want to wait for 15 years to be able to be sure that you've got the correct breed. But with molecular technologies, you are able to pick up quite quickly whether you've got the right genetic combinations for whatever you want to grow that particular plant for. So this has really been a project that has been going on for a number of years with over 15 million rands invested by ourselves as a department. We also have, in partnership with various industry players through what we call the Sector Innovation Fund, invested more than 25 million rands. And we are quite excited about these investments because they are actually generating the correct traction, making sure that where employment could have been lost maybe because of other challenges in the industry, we either are maintaining or adding to that particular challenges. I think the value of maize in this country and the continent cannot be overemphasized. We therefore need to always make sure that we provide various support in these areas. And this, as a department, we are quite pleased to be part of the work around the maize breeding program with the partners, as you can see. Now, then there is also the issue of, in terms of nutrition, protein. We know that animal proteins can be quite expensive, so we look at how do we support alternative protein sources, whether it's soybean, etc. And then in the context of the Agri Pacts, we are beginning to look at what are the sort of innovations that can actually empower the growth of the Agri Pacts. And the issue is really about the state of readiness through innovations, so that when these Agri Pacts find the traction that they require, you can be able to be very certain about what is actually suitable to grow in a particular area and during what time, and can you actually make a living out of that particular crop? Then we've got programs that we're supporting through our agency, the Technology Innovation Agency. These are in area of beef breeding, dairy breeding, and also generally the animal health cluster. In the area of agro-processing, as I've indicated, we also are looking at indigenous knowledge systems. Now we've got a program that we've just launched around Marula Project, where we are providing funding for the development of proper varieties that can actually produce high quality oils, working with the communities, the Honey Bush Research and Development Program. And I must also indicate that we also have programs that are going on now around Moringa, and we are now actively involved in projects that are also involving research in cannabis. Because you also need to be aware that when you deal with cannabis, this is actually a very big animal where a whole range of products can actually be sourced from this, whether you talk about the medicinal and the health and other areas in terms of the manufacturing of clothes, etc. So that is really quite important to really know which will be the particular varieties that you want to grow in a particular area, and how do you process those going forward. We have looked at some work around rice, and we also now have done some feasibility studies around sorghum, which we think can actually add into making sure that we've got a variety of crops that we can lean back to in case of having to deal with various challenges, as some of these crops have got different resilience capabilities, whether you talk about droughts and diseases. So we are really quite focused, as I've indicated also with the sector innovation funds, on revitalizing some of the dying sectors. We've got investments that we're making to see how best can we actually revitalize the sugar industry by looking at alternative products that can be commercialized from those sectors as opposed to the traditional ones. And of course, we also support human capital development. And we're doing this in partnership with various industry associations and bodies. And in doing implementation of the sector innovation funds, the industry is actually the ones that identify the challenges, determines the R&D agenda, and then we provide jointly with other partners the funding and also the governance structures. And I think this is pretty much the kind of model that we're working towards, even in the development of the master plans, amongst which they include the focus on agriculture. So these are some of the seeds that we're having. The Citrus Research International. We can talk about the wine tech. I've mentioned the sugar, the marine finfish one, which has now been discontinued. Fresh Produce Export Forum, the forestry. I've mentioned some projects around forestry. And then now, lastly, as I come to end, is really what we're doing in the area of IK-based innovation. This is really looking at those crops, those plants, those animals that can actually contribute towards medicines, towards cosmetics, towards nutraceuticals, and IK-based health beverages platform. And what we need to know is that this is actually a very growing sector currently. When you walk into your Clicks or your Discam, you see that these products are now becoming a feature, and they just growing in terms of how people are actually consuming this product. So we have actually over the years now supported the production of over 60 commercial products, 30 rural and urban SMEs that have been supported, and cooperatives, up to 300 actual jobs. And the critical thing here is that we are working predominantly with women in rural areas who are actually creating a lot of employment in their own home sectors. So what I really need to emphasize is that we always make sure that the work that we do is supported by very good basic sciences. Hence, we've got what we call the centers of excellence, the ones focusing on food security, others are focusing on all areas of biodiversity, just to make sure that we do not run out of the basic sciences that support the generation of innovations. So these are some of the highlights of the investment we've been making. And this is what the Technology Innovation Agency has done in terms of the breeding and the reproduction technologies, animal health and nutrition, plant health and nutrition, post-harvest technologies, which are very crucial. And this is really just to show how our spread of support is in terms of provinces and in terms of the areas, whether it is plant health, animal health, nutrition, breeding, etc. And we want to really make sure that the footprint is actually much broader than this, because one of the things that we're focusing on is what we call the spatial transformation. How do we make sure that our programs are actually having the highest coverage insofar as the rest of the country is concerned? These are some of the spin-out companies that have come out of the work that we have supported. And we're beginning to see, for example, newer technologies around the production, for example, of biopesticides, etc. And we think that these are solutions that are actually going to move out of the use of chemicals. This is another spin-out companies. And again, we're quite excited when we got bio-based companies that are being spun out of innovations that are coming out from our research and technology. Mabu casing, which is another exciting project that is focusing on plant health, growth, and nutrition, and development of alternative casing substrates for button mushrooms. This is the project that has now grown to look at other areas beyond just the casing for mushrooms. The Future Fynbos project, of course, to make sure that we continue to preserve and grow our fynbos flower sector. And this is quite big in terms of, especially when you look at the export market and, of course, just making sure that a month like February, which is the love month, actually continue to make sure that the families are kept together. Agri Protein is one of the projects that we funded, and this is really very, very exciting project because it is really about how you can actually move into making sure that what we call waste is actually considered an input into a process and value addition, where we are now having companies that are being spun out to generate feed from waste. So this is a project that is based in Cape Town, in Philippi, but it is starting to grow tentacles into other provinces and also globally. It has received funding from the US for its expansion, so this is quite exciting. These are some previous projects that we funded where after the success of the project, the technology innovation stake was actually sold out to other investors. But the point that we really want to continue to emphasize is that there are a lot of opportunities through technology and innovation. And as a Department of Science and Innovation, we're looking forward to partnering to make sure that we can actually address the challenges that you're dealing with in your sectors through research, technology development, and innovation. And I hope that as we engage, and some of my colleagues are going to be here throughout the whole conference, that we're going to also establish certain partnerships where we can identify some of the joint programs that we can work towards. But the reality is that we cannot do agriculture the way it has been done over the past many years because so many things have changed, and we need to really juggle so many unknowns. And innovations, technology development is going to have to be at the center of making sure that we move forward. Thank you so much.